Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for May 23rd, 2011, the podcast that knows infinity backwards and forwards. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's take a gander at the news of the Bogus. You may not have noticed if you weren't paying much attention, but the world did not end this past weekend. This certainly comes as news to Harold Camping, who predicted, using mathematics and a literal interpretation of the Bible, the second coming of Jesus Christ on May 21st, 2011. He said specifically, quote, "Beyond the shadow of a doubt, May 21 will be the date of the rapture and the day of judgment." Camping, using the literal word of the Bible, absolutely and with certainty dated the Great Flood to 4990 BC. 986 years before God created the heavens and the earth, as calculated by Bishop James Ussher, using the literal word of the Bible, absolutely and with certainty. I don't know, it doesn't seem like an exact science to me. Maybe that's what went wrong. The world actually ended 986 years ago, and everybody was too busy existing to notice. All that remains now is to see if one more prediction will come true. The prediction from Richard Dawkins that, quote, "He will inevitably explain, on May 22nd, that there must have been some error in the calculation. The rapture is postponed to... and please send more money to pay for updated billboards." It was the biggest insider trading case since Martha Stewart was convicted by 12 people who didn't understand the concept of a stop loss. Rajaratnam was convicted of gaining $50 million, if by gaining you mean not losing, by trading based on inside information. Insider trading refers to using material information, generally information not available to the public, to evaluate whether or not to buy or sell a stock. Without even getting into the fact that this definition seems to change with each and every case, what the hell is wrong with insider trading to begin with? Don't people have the right to buy or sell stock based on whatever knowledge they can obtain? At most, you can say that the people dispensing the information, people that Raj got the information from, have violated the law, but Supreme Court precedent says that even this is limited to cases where it's a breach of fiduciary duty and when they personally benefit. But the person on the receiving end of the information has no such fiduciary duty, and so he should be free to do whatever he wants based on that information. Legitimate laws are based on harm, but insider trading is another victimless crime. You have one person buying stocks and another selling them at an agreed-upon price. People argue that it's unfair for one person in a transaction to have knowledge and another doesn't, but this happens all the time and is legal in pretty much every other situation. And misguided concepts of fairness aside, stopping insider trading causes direct harm to everyone else in the market. Markets work through the so-called wisdom of crowds. It's a bit misnamed. It should more accurately be called the knowledge of crowds, but it refers to the process by which players in the market act as if they have all of the knowledge available. Generally, this is done through the price mechanism. Someone who dumps stock based on insider information that the company isn't doing well is not harming the person buying the stock, because that person was going to buy it anyway. But it does play into the price of the stock. By increasing the supply of the stock up for sale, it lowers the price, both indicating that the stock isn't worth as much and mitigating the losses of the people who buy it. Let's say the price of a stock is $50 a share, and it'll drop to $30 after the information becomes public. But an insider trader sells his stock, and that move, along with all the other insiders selling theirs, causes the price to drop to $45 a share. Now let's say someone buys 1,000 shares of the stock from him. With the insider trading, he pays $45,000 and the value drops to $30,000. He loses $15,000. But if you successfully stop the insider trading, then he buys the stock at the full price for $50,000 and loses $5,000 more than he would have if the insiders had been allowed to trade. Supply and demand works by everyone using whatever resources they can to ascertain the true value of the stock, and everybody benefits. Even the great economist Milton Friedman advocated for insider trading on this basis. Anything that allows people in the market to take advantage of the available information should absolutely be allowed. But the fairness nuts would look at my example and see the insider stealing $15,000 from the buyer. They assume that somehow the buyer only wanted to buy the stock because the insider was selling it and wouldn't have bought it from anyone else otherwise. This is completely wrong, and this is why they don't see the $5,000 that is stolen from the buyer due to these misguided laws. Some say that in such a case he should be required to make all the information public first, but why should he? Even if it isn't a breach of contract or fiduciary duty to do so, all a requirement would do is force him to sell the stock at a lower price after the information is out there, meaning that he now has no incentive to make any trades based on the stock anyway, and everyone buys at the higher price. So how would a so-called level playing field benefit anybody? It wouldn't. It would only create losses, both for the insider and for everyone else trading in the stock. The government loves to whip up public sentiment against guys like this, repeating over and over again how he made $50,000 swindling the market. But he didn't make $50,000, he merely avoided losing it, and no one else lost any money as a result that they wouldn't have lost anyway. There are no victims anywhere. It's also blatant cherry picking. No one can predict the future of a stock, and it's just as likely for information to backfire and the insider lose money as a result. But, of course, government never prosecutes those cases. There is one testable prediction that the theory used by the foes of insider trading makes. That people who are part of the company, the CEOs, executives, etc., should be making outrageous profits buying and selling the stock of their own companies. Yet every time someone has analyzed this, and there are numerous investment newsletters devoted to doing just that, these outrageous profits never seem to surface, and over time the people in these privileged positions do no better than the market return for their stocks. Insider trading is a victimless crime that harms no one, but you don't hear that from the news media. Once again, we see that skepticism just isn't something they do. They're happy to parrot the arguments of government bureaucrats as they get rich prosecuting people who have harmed no one, and in the process, they themselves cause great harm to the markets, not to mention our tax bills. It is still the case, and will be for the foreseeable future, that being a skeptic requires a lot of hard work, and is likely to make a lot of enemies from people who just don't want to think about what they're told. On the 15th of June 1215, King John signed into law Magna Carta, laying the foundation for the very property rights upon which our country is based. This document declared that no freeman can be punished except by the rule of law, as opposed to the rule of men, and that no official, not even the king himself, could enter a private dwelling without either permission of the owner or a warrant issued through the law, a right codified into the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Last week, the Indiana Supreme Court overturned all of that, not once, but twice. In the first case, Lacey v. State of Indiana, police violated the terms of a search warrant by forcing their way into a home without knocking. Warrants must have a no-knock clause for the police to do this. This one didn't. The court acknowledged that this was the case, but said in the decision, quote, "Prior judicial authorization based on information known when a warrant is obtained is not required for unannounced public entries." They also said, "We hold that Article 1, Section 11 of the Indiana Constitution, which prohibits unreasonable search or seizure, does not require prior judicial authorization for the no-knock execution of a warrant when justified by exigent circumstances, even if such circumstances are known by the police when the warrant is obtained." This turns the entire concept of a written constitution on its head. A written constitution is there to define the powers and scope of government. When government claims powers not authorized by that constitution, they become a tyranny, and that constitution, nothing more than meaningless words on paper. But their second decision, only 2 days later, was much more egregious. In this case, Richard Barnes and his wife were arguing, and she called 911. Police responded to a possible report of domestic violence. Barnes was moving out of the apartment at the time and was packing and leaving when police arrived, so he told the police he was leaving and there was no need to interfere. His wife confirmed this. When police tried to enter their apartment anyway, Barnes blocked their way, and when they tried to force their way in, again without a warrant, he shoved one of the officers against the wall and was promptly tasered, sending him to the hospital. In his trial, Barnes submitted an instruction to the jury that citizens have a right to reasonably resist unlawful entry into one's home. The judge refused to give this instruction to the jury, even though it is absolutely what the law says. But the Indiana Supreme Court concluded, completely arbitrarily, quote, "Public policy disfavors any such right. Accordingly, the trial court's refusal to give Barnes tendered instructions was not an error." Even though they acknowledge the precedent going back to Magna Carta, and even though they acknowledge that the U.S. Supreme Court has upheld this precedent several times. They even acknowledged that the police entry was illegal. They had no warrant, nor did they have any probable cause to believe any law was being broken. But after citing a bunch of facts that have no relevance whatsoever to the case, they stated directly, quote, "The right to reasonably resist an unlawful police entry into a home is no longer recognized under Indiana law." In order to charge Barnes with battery, the Indiana Supreme Court said, "The state needed to demonstrate that Barnes knowingly or intentionally touched the officer in a rude, insolent, or angry manner while the officer was engaged in the execution of his official duty." But as the court itself acknowledged, this wasn't an execution of his official duty. It was an illegal entry. They even said as much when they reiterated, "Because we decline to recognize the right of a homeowner to resist unlawful entry, Barnes is not entitled to batter Reed, irrespective as to the legality of Reed's entry." 2 judges dissented, saying, "The common law rule supporting a citizen's right to resist unlawful entry into her home rests on the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. It is breathtaking that the majority deems it appropriate or even necessary to erode this constitutional protection based on a rationale addressing much different policy considerations. There is simply no reason to abrogate the common law right of a citizen to resist the unlawful police entry into his or her home." Each and every one of the judges upholding these rulings swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. They have clearly violated this oath, and if there's anything remotely resembling justice in what's left of our republic, each and every one of them should be impeached. Is this a republic governed by the rule of law, or a police state governed by the rule of men? It would be bad enough if they'd said the police can break the law and get away with it. This court went even further and said that we can't even defend ourselves against cops acting illegally. What is this country coming to? Now it's time to don rubber gloves and protect ourselves from this week's biggest Bogon emitter. The TSA has been in the news a lot lately for their hideously offensive, grossly unconstitutional, and laughingly ineffective body scanning and pat-down methods. After several hundred complaints directly from passengers, including the parents of a 16-year-old girl and an infant, opposition is growing, so much that the Texas House of Representatives just passed HB 1937 and 1938 to try and protect citizens of Texas from this gross Fourth Amendment violation. HB 1938 would make it a civil offense for an airport operator to install or operate body scanning equipment. HB 1937 would make searching a person without probable cause and touching the anus, sexual organ, or breasts of the person, even through clothing, a felony punishable by jail time. Well, the TSA has officially responded to this legislation. Here's what they posted on their blog. Quote, "What's our take on the Texas House of Representatives voting to ban the current TSA pat-down? Well, the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2, prevents states from regulating the federal government." Bogus! First of all, it's idiotic to claim that Texas is trying to regulate the federal government. We've covered the concept of state nullification on a previous podcast. That's all that is happening here. States defending their citizens from violation of their rights as they're supposed to do. But what's worse, they're lying outright about what the Supremacy Clause says. Here's the entire clause. Quote, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." Note that it's laws made in pursuance of the Constitution, but nothing in Article 1, Section 8 gives the federal government the authority to search citizens at airports or even to be there in the first place. And the Fourth Amendment expressly forbids them from searching any citizen anywhere without probable cause backed up by a warrant. Nowhere in the TSA's long screed do they actually attempt to show where the Constitution gives them the power to engage in these warrantless searches, probably because it isn't there. What they do say is mere propaganda. The pat-down is a highly effective tool to resolve certain alarms and keep these dangerous items off of planes that could cause catastrophic damage. It's important to note that if a passenger or bag alarms during screening, our officers must resolve the alarm before allowing the passenger and their baggage on the airplane. How effective is it really? Just ask Adam Savage of Mythbusters.
I take some strange things home in my laptop bag from work, as you can imagine. And so before I get on a plane, some of those things are not only esoteric and potentially dangerous, but also expensive and hard to find. So I go through my laptop bag every time I fly to make sure nothing nefarious gets on there, except today. And I'm going through the TSA checkpoint, and they're doing the thing where they're yelling at you while you're doing what they're yelling at you to do. And then just before I'm going through the scanner, they put me through the body scanner, which makes, for some reason, my penis feel really small. And then I get onto the airplane, and I look and I notice that I've brought this thing with me. 2 12-inch long steel razor blades. TSA? You're gonna look at my junk and somehow you missed this? My tiny junk is offended. Oh, and a whole bunch of nuts and bolts that were in there too, which I figure must look like really no, they were just, I don't know.
The ineffectiveness of the TSA would be laughably ridiculous if it weren't so unconscionable. If any private company did this to people, say in a mall, they'd be arrested and thrown in jail for sexual assault. But the TSA commits these crimes all the time, even against children. And then, when people say enough is enough and work to make their actions the civil and criminal offenses that they are, their response is to lie outright about what that legislation does and what the Constitution says. If that doesn't qualify them for biggest Bogon emitter, then I don't know what would. Now it's time to don 3D glasses to witness the depths of stupidity from this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
President Barack Obama may not have said as many stupid things as his predecessor, George W. Bush, but he seems determined to catch up. In a statement released by the White House's press secretary, quote, "Oil companies are posting near-record profits." The statement advocates getting rid of oil subsidies, which is a good thing, but once again we see that yet another tax, borrow, and spend politician just doesn't want to address the elephant in the living room when it comes to gas prices. First off, just how big are these near-record profits? The White House would have you believe that oil companies are gouging the price to make you pay more so they can become richer. But according to Mark Perry, professor of economics and finance at the University of Michigan, the near-record profits from the biggest player, ExxonMobil, was just a little more than 2 cents per gallon of gas. Just 2 cents! Yet how much does government take per gallon in gasoline taxes? According to the American Petroleum Institute, the combined federal, state, and local taxes that the average American pays on gas is 49.5 cents per gallon, almost 25 times as much as ExxonMobil made in profits. And that's just the average. In many states, people pay a lot more, as much as 70.3 cents in Massachusetts. And the state with the lowest gasoline tax, Alaska, still takes 26.4 cents of every gallon. Even if you only look at federal taxes, they're still 9 times greater than Exxon's gasoline profits. And keep in mind that Exxon actually obtains the oil, refines it, gets it where it needs to be, and gets it all ready to put in your pump. Whereas government doesn't produce anything. It just takes money from consumers to pay for its programs. If Exxon's near-record profits are gouging the public when they're the ones that actually do the work, then what do you call what government is doing? Again, ending subsidies to oil companies is a good thing, but really it doesn't amount to that much. In 2010, the federal government paid over $4 billion in subsidies to the oil companies, but Americans consumed 138.5 billion gallons of gasoline. That ends up being just under 3 cents per gallon, again, far lower than what government takes from us in taxes. So who's doing the gouging here, oil companies or government taxes? That the president doesn't even mention this issue, even to try and justify it, means that either he's deliberately distracting us from the issue, or he's so incompetent that he shouldn't be president, shouldn't even hold the office of file clerk, and in fact, isn't qualified to be anything except this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this jurisprudential edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you'd like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Niels Bohr. Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license.